Sup, my name is Alex. Tell me, guys, many of you probably want to quickly become adults and independent, right? It's so cool to make your own decisions, to live the way you want, and in general, not to ask anyone's permission, including your parents. So, I recently went through a similar thing. Yes, my mother decided to give me the green light for everything. We had an agreement, and now I want to tell you about my experience and what I went through. In general, listen. I have both a father and mother. I was born a late child in the family. My parents couldn't get pregnant for years, and that's probably why when I was born, my mother was especially protective of me. From the first moment she took me in her arms, she never let me go, so my father said. My mother wouldn't let anyone hold me, didn't show me to any of her friends for the first 6 months, and I don't think even the neighbors really knew she'd given birth. My mother was too careful, but it made her feel better. It was her love. My father had assumed that all this was temporary, that as soon as I grew up, my mother would be more relaxed about everything, but he was wrong. You know, the older I got, the more problems my mother had. For example, every time I went to the kitchen to turn on the kettle to drink tea or cocoa, my mother would run in at the speed of light and take any equipment out of my hands. She thought that I could get burned, hurt, or even die, and preferred to do it herself. But that's half the trouble. I still have a radio nanny in my bedroom, so you understand, I'm already 16 years old. My mother is calmer when she hears me snoring, and if I turn off the radio, she runs to my room and listens to me breathe, and in the morning I'm in trouble. Until recently, my mother did not let me go for a walk with friends, and if she let me go, then I had to return home no later than 2000. All my friends already mocked me, but if I was late for at least 15 minutes, my mother began to get hysterical. She immediately put pressure on pity, her advanced age, and on the fact that she has a weak heart. I was getting tired of it. I wondered why I was paying the price for being born so late. I'm not allowed to breathe freely at all. My every step is monitored, and my mother's overprotection is seen by everyone except herself. And one day, I rebelled. It happened at one of the parties. My classmate Spence invited me to his house. He promised me to introduce me to a girl that I have long liked. Her name was Nellie. Of course, my mom again only let me go until 2000 hours, whereas the party started at 1900 hours. I wanted to argue with her, but then I thought, I will not spoil the mood. Just do everything quietly, silently, and in fact, I will sort it out at home. I packed up and went to a party just before the weekend. I'm in a great mood. There were a lot of people at the party, well, including Nellie. Spence introduced us, as promised, and the time flew by so fast that I didn't notice it was already 2030. Nellie and I went out on the balcony, drinking juice and chatting about something. All of a sudden, my phone was just tearing apart, and I could see my mom calling. I didn't want to embarrass myself in front of the girl, and I stupidly dumped. Finally, when my mom called me 23 times, Nellie asked if she was a girl who was hitting on me. I said, no, that's it. The house is ringing. Apparently they want something. I'll call you back later, I said, and turned off the phone. Nellie and I chatted and paid no attention to anyone. Then we got hungry and decided to go downstairs. I took her hand and we went down the stairs. Nellie was just an unreal girl. I've been wanting to meet her for so long. Alex, why did you turn off the phone? A voice that was painfully familiar to me. It sounded all over the house. I looked up and saw my mother looking furious. She was standing in the middle of a house in slippers and homely clothes, her hands folded on her hips and glaring at me. I immediately ran to her. I wanted to take her as far as possible, but she continued to yell. She was furious. You're being punished. There will be no internet for a week, no pocket money for you, and just try to turn off the radio nanny now, she shouted. At that moment, my world collapsed. When everyone heard about the radio nanny, the whole house exploded with laughter. Everyone looked at me and laughed, and I wanted to sink into the ground. I grabbed my mother's hand, and without even saying goodbye to anyone, I drove home. I didn't talk to her all the way, and when we got home I told her what I was thinking. I shouted that she had shamed me in front of the guys, especially the girl, that I was tired of her tutelage and control, that I wanted freedom, to which my mother told me that I was not independent at all. You're giving me opportunities to become one. How old am I now? And you're acting like I'm 2 years old. My father intervened, trying to calm us all down, and then said we were both going too far. He talked to my mother that I was right about something, and then asked me not to raise my voice to my mother anymore. My mother was very unhappy, and then said that she gives me 1 month without any restrictions on anything. We agreed, and from the very next day, I began to live a different life. I cleaned up the radio nanny, made my own breakfast. It was such bliss. I packed my own bag for school and decided with my friends on my weekend plans. Every day was precious. I was just happy to be free. I worked at school from morning till lunch, and then went for a walk with Nellie. By the way, she reacted with understanding to the situation, said that she has a strict father, so she understands me. We started dating. I came home late. At first it seemed to me, it's a buzz, but after a week I almost didn't get enough sleep. My mother didn't really talk to me, so as not to annoy herself once again, so I didn't climb. Then I went back to the party. To be honest, I was a little freaked out by the freedom. For the weekend, I went back to the party, as I said, so that's where I tried alcohol for the first time. I was so carried away that I didn't even notice. I didn't understand what was wrong with me. Nellie tried to stop me, but I didn't listen to her. I drank more, and then decided to try to smoke, which made me feel even worse. At some point, I think I passed out, came to myself in the morning. I didn't remember where I was or with whom. The house was unfamiliar to me. It was dirty and uncomfortable. I looked in the refrigerator for a drink, drank some juice, took a shower, and then went to look for a house. In the yard I met someone. It was probably the owner of the house. He shook my hand and called me crazy and offered to continue. I am without hesitation, agreed, and we drank again. In the afternoon we wanted to eat, but there was no food, as well as money. We went with him to the market drunk, took food without asking, and began to eat. The owner of the store chased us. We began to run away. He called the police. That guy easily dodged the cops when they arrived. They almost grabbed him, but he set me up. Yes, he pushed me towards them and then ran away. I only sobered up at the station. I was terribly ashamed in front of my father when he came to pull me out. It turns out that I was not at home for 3 days, and I did not even remember where I was and with whom. Dad pulled me out, and I came home all swollen, dirty, and smelly. My mother didn't ask a word. After I took a shower, I went over to her and apologized. "Son, are you in trouble?" asked the mother. I lied to her, told her everything was fine, and then my mother said something I didn't expect to hear. "I'm sorry, it's my fault. If I hadn't held you back so much, if I hadn't banned everything, you wouldn't have gone to the police. I wouldn't drink myself into oblivion. Everything should have its time," she said. These words sounded sincere. I did not expect to hear this, but suddenly I realized that I was also stupid and screwed up. I asked her for forgiveness, and we agreed to respect each other's boundaries, to be close, but to get into each other's lives by force. My father said it was the right thing to do. Well, what do you guys think? My mother and I have kept our word ever since. I didn't drink or smoke anymore, but my mom trusted me more and threw out the radio nanny.
Hi, my name is Mia. I will write this story to you because it is very difficult for me to speak now. I'm still recovering from the betrayal that my parents committed a few years ago. After this incident, I stopped talking. Literally, I was speechless. And only now, I'm slowly coming to myself. It happened when I was 12. We were just a usual family. My parents earned as much as they could all their lives. We have no relatives in this city, so we relied on ourselves. Yes, life was difficult. And there were times when we only ate bread. The father and mother do everything they can, take any job. My father, in addition to his regular work, managed to be a porter in the evenings until late night, my mother as a cleaner, and I spent all my adult life with my grandmother. I can't say that I was happy with her. My grandmother was very grumpy. She was always yelling at everyone, at me and my parents. She often called her daughter, my mother, a badass and reproached for any action. Sometimes I would see my mom cry about it, and my dad just get mad in silence. And everyone in the family was unhappy, but no one said it aloud. As for me, I went to school and tried to study well. Yes, I had A's in all subjects, but even the grades didn't lift my mother's spirits. It seemed to me that all the problems in the house were due to me alone. One day, there was hope for a better future. My parents were offered to go abroad to work. It would be all right, but I had to leave with my grandmother here. I couldn't believe they would decide that, knowing her character and how she felt about me. I was so offended that my fate was determined without asking me. My father and mother began to actively make documents and look for money. They hugged me goodbye and told me they would pick me up soon. I waited every day. All that's left is my mother's old jacket in the hall of the house. I went to her and hugged her, inhaled her mother's smell, but over time, it began to disappear. As expected, we found it difficult to get along with Granny. There was not even a day went by without shouts and reproaches at me. When I gave her glasses at the wrong time, she would get angry. "What took so long? Where are my glasses? You can't even do that! Left your parents, you on my neck!" Always shouted at me. At this point, I stood and listened to the reproaches, and when my grandmother fell asleep, I lay hugging my mother's jacket and crying. Every time someone rang the doorbell, I ran to answer it, hoping that they were my parents. But no, they weren't. I began to shut down into myself, slide through school, lost all my friends, went straight home after school. Otherwise, there was no avoiding screams. I talked less and less with people and kept more and more silent. Life with Granny was more like a dark mode. In the morning, getting up, cooking breakfast, going to school, then home, lunch, cooking dinner, lessons, going to bed. Every night before going to bed, I waited for a call from them. But before going to bed, as always, I hugged my mother's jacket. I took her to my room, so it seemed to me that they were close. A year passed. There was no call. I didn't know if they were still alive. My grandmother and I almost stopped communicating. She spends her days watching TV, and I was doing other jobs. The ritual with the jacket faded into the background, and I hung it in the closet and did not get it out. "They won't come back," Grandma once said. "It's been 5 years," she added, and stared at the TV again. It hurt to hear that, and I didn't want to believe it. They probably didn't call because they couldn't, but I knew for sure that very soon they would save up money and come for me as promised. We'll buy a small house no matter where, and the 3 of us will live together. We're family, aren't we? "Look, your mother!" My eyes widened in shock. My cup of tea fell from my hands to the floor, and my heart was pounding in my chest. My mother was on TV. She gave interviews to journalists about her success story, how she came as a migrant and opened her small business, a coffee shop in a foreign country. The press asked how far she had come, and then asked if her family was helping her. "I don't have a family," she blurted out. At that moment, I felt as if I had been hit on the head. Grandma turned off the TV and laughed out loud. She laughed louder and louder, as if gloating. I ran out of the house, reached the neighbors of the street, sat down by a tree, and began to sob. Yes, I have so many questions over the years. But soon, I got answers. I just found this coffee shop on the internet, wrote down the phone numbers, and called. My mother was silent for a long time, and then began to justify herself. She told how father cheated on her almost immediately after arriving. She kicked him out of the house and has not heard from him since. And she didn't call me because at first she didn't have money, then time. Everything so spun, and flew 5 years. She said that she missed me, that she wanted to take me home and start a good new life. "No, you didn't miss me," I told her, and hung up. Those were my last words. She called a couple more times, but I didn't answer. I just took her jacket out of the closet and burned it. They betrayed me, both of them. A year later, I buried my grumpy grandmother. Well, then I heard rumors that they both started their own new families. My father never had the heart to talk to me. My mother came to settle the paperwork with my grandmother's house. By that time, I had already graduated from school and was working. My meeting with her was not at all what I had imagined in my head before all this. She felt ashamed and confused. She begged, fell on her knees, begged for forgiveness. I never said a word, and she left. Why couldn't I forgive her? You know, I could put it all down to the fact that she and father went away to earn money for me, to invest in my future, to make our life better. But this is not the case. They simply did not love me, each other. I realized that they really left to leave, seizing on a small chance to start life again They initially did not plan to return here for me, understanding in absentia that they would disperse. So it is not poverty or distance that destroys the family. It is the absence of love that destroys the family, and only that. So I never forgave her, and I never will, for not loving me.